I found Mr. Giggles in a dumpster behind what was once a magic store. I'd always thought ventriloquist dummies were lame, but there was something different about him. The moment he slid onto my arm, I felt this power. It was as though cascading waves of energy were running through my entire body. I felt strong, confident, complete. In the months that followed, ventriloquism became my new obsession. I bought countless books on the subject. This was before you could just look things up on YouTube, and practiced morning, noon, and night. Mr. Giggles and I became inseparable. You can imagine my surprise when he sprang to life one evening. I asked Ben Lawrence to the dance earlier that day. It didn't go well. "But Donna," he replied, "I heard you were already taking someone." "You did?" I asked innocently. "Yeah. Aren't you going with your doll?" His friends erupted with laughter. Later, as I was crying into my pillow, Mr. Giggles spoke. "Are you just going to sit back and take that from him?" I sat up and wiped my tears away. Mr. Giggles? Did you just talk?" My hand operated him all on its own. "Who does this guy think he's messing with?" he said. "Embarrassing you in front of everybody like that?" His head completed a full rotation. "We gotta get him for this. Nobody talks to my best friend like that. Nobody." What followed was an elaborate scheme to dump 20 pounds of manure on top of Ben at the spring fling dance. Mr. Giggles masterminded it, obviously, and his plan went off without a hitch. It took him 3 weeks to get rid of the smell. From that point on, Mr. Giggles spoke non-stop, insisting we exact revenge for even the slightest indiscretion. And after that, we graduated to petty crimes, theft, graffiti, vandalism. I wanted to stop, but he had his hold on me. Sometimes it felt as though I was the puppet. Even when we were apart, I heard his voice in my head ordering me how to act. One afternoon, as we were walking home, Miss Wendell's cat lunged at us. "You want to go, furball?" Mr. Giggles shouted. I begged him to stop. Honestly, I did. Miss Wendell's cat was a mean old thing, but that doesn't justify what Mr. Giggles did. And when he put his handiwork on display for the whole neighborhood to see, I knew things had officially gone too far. So, I locked him inside a hamper and stashed it in the attic. The end. Except it wasn't the end. No, not by a long shot. Without Mr. Giggles, I was like a junkie going through withdrawal. My arm felt incomplete. My mood hit such a low, even my absentee parents recognized something was wrong and sent me to a psychologist. I told her everything, even the part about Miss Wendell's cat. She insisted Mr. Giggles was my coping mechanism, and that his actions were really just me acting out. "Think back to those times he took control," she'd say. "Before he did, were you feeling scared or angry or upset?" I paused for a moment. "Well, yeah." "And did it make you feel better seeing Mr. Giggles exact revenge on the people who hurt you?" "It did." She leaned forward with a sympathetic smile. "I think we both know who was really in control." With the therapist's help, I broke free of Mr. Giggles. The urge to wear him subsided slowly, freeing me from his dark influence. In time, his voice quieted, and then disappeared entirely. Decades passed. I grew up, got married, mostly forgot about the whole horrible ordeal. But then one night, my husband and I were arguing in the kitchen. "How could you sit around playing video games for 2 days straight when my mother is dying in the hospital?" he shouted. I sighed in response. We'd been fighting a lot lately. Between me losing my job and his mother's poor health, things had become tense. Our relationship was like a pressure cooker ready to explode. "Do you care about anything that isn't about you?" he asked. With Without answering, I stormed into the hall. A moment later, I felt a peculiar pinch at the back of my skull. You didn't forget about your old pal, Mr. Giggles, did ya? In an almost trance-like state, I made my way towards the attic. There, I pushed aside boxes filled with old clothes until I stumbled upon the familiar hamper. Mr. Giggles was wearing his trademark pinstripe suit and red bow tie. I gulped. My hand trembled as it approached the slot in his back. A tingling sensation danced across my fingertips. Jolts of excitement ran from my palm and down to the soles of my feet. With a heavy sigh, I closed my eyes and slid him onto my arm. The moment I did, his mouth flapped open. Kill him. I ripped him off. He looked up at me, that self-satisfied grin forever painted on his face. I couldn't keep him around. If I did, some twisted part of my subconscious might have acted out. I loved my husband more than anything. Well, sure, we'd been having our problems lately, but so did every couple. I carried Mr. Giggles downstairs, meaning to rush straight to the dump and be done with him once and for all. But then my husband shouted from within the kitchen. And where do you think you're going? My jaw clenched. In the back of my mind, my therapist spoke in a calm voice. Think back to those times Mr. Giggles took control. Before he did, were you feeling scared or angry or upset? Perhaps it was best to face my problems head on. Sure, I could get rid of Mr. Giggles, but the underlying issue would still be there. Breathing deeply, I set him aside and entered the kitchen. My husband was standing behind the counter, gritting his teeth. I raised a hand. I've got something to say. He opened his mouth to protest. 2 minutes! That's all I'm asking for. He sighed. I know I haven't been very attentive lately, but it's just between losing my job and... He rolled his eyes. But that's no excuse. I understand that now. First thing tomorrow, I'll start looking for a new one. And I'm putting a stop to the gaming, I swear. He sighed. Promise? Promise. We kissed. Honey, I said, I've got some stuff to take to the dump. Want me to pick up anything from the store on the way back? No, I think we're fine. As I wandered back to the hall, my husband grabbed an envelope off the counter. Before I could leave the house, he screamed louder than a 747 taking flight. Why are you spending $5,000 on OnlyFans? I clutched Mr. Giggles between two quaking hands. Kill him. He'll never understand you like I do. Kill him! Then it'll be just like old times. At that moment, I realized my therapist was wrong. Mr. Giggles was real, and no amount of new age hippie bullcrap could convince me otherwise. He couldn't be stopped. Not by me. Not by anybody. Donna, come back here! My husband called. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and pulled Mr. Giggles onto my arm. Once he was in position, his head completed a full rotation. He guided us back to the kitchen, where my husband was red with fury. What the heck is that thing on your arm? Ignoring him, Mr. Giggles grabbed a knife off the counter and raised it above his head.